Today's guest has had a front row seat to how travel is evolving. Dan Christian is the founder and host of Travel Trends, the leading B2B podcast in the travel industry.
I think the privilege I have now doing this podcast is because of the 20 years of experience I have in the industry.
How did you know that this would work, and what made you bet on that?
And the whole premise was I wasn't sure where it was going to go. I'll create 10 episodes and I will interview some of the most important executives around the world and find out what they're seeing post-pandemic about how the travel industry has changed. What's the same? What's different? Well, a lot of people wanted to tap into other people's learning.
He helped lead digital travel transformation across 40 global travel brands. So when he talks about where travel is headed, from sustainability to transformation to traveler behavior, he's bringing you both strategic and human insight. Sustainability, regeneration, are travelers having a problem understanding what any of it means?
Yes, and terminology is one of the big challenges. Travelers are going to go from 400 million a year in 2025 to 800 million a year in 2050. We have to be talking about sustainability. We have to be talking about overcrowding. We have to be finding new ways for people to experience destinations because the appetite for travel is only going to increase.
If you were a travel brand right now, what would you tell them to stop saying? What would you tell them to start saying if they really want to be relevant in this next chapter?
Something I strongly believe, and you can play this back in 5 years, and I think the odds are likely this will be the case, is that
every great travel journey begins with a question. Where to next? And how do we protect what makes it beautiful? Welcome to the Conscious Check-In, the podcast where sustainable hospitality, unforgettable travel, and bold conservation stories collide. I'm your host, Amy Wald, and this is your Conscious Check-In. Dan, I'm so glad to have you here on the Conscious Check-In. Welcome.
Thank you, Amy. It's a real honor to be here. I'm a big fan of the Conscious Check-In podcast and what you do. So yeah, thanks for the invitation.
The feeling is mutual. I'm excited. You've been doing this for a long time and you've had some incredible conversations. And you know what I really love about these conversations are, this is not your typical trajectory, right? I think a lot of things in honesty during those conversations are born and are formed. And I know that you have been a part of many of those conversations. Now, this wasn't something we talked about, but can you think of something that like through the conversation, there was like, oh my gosh, we just landed on the next big thing or something like that?
Well, we did have an episode that was a really landmark one for us. And I interviewed the founder of a company called At Hotel, Conrad, and we titled the episode, Social is the New SEO. And the title itself was obviously captivating. And so many of us are seeing marketing changing and trying to wrap their heads around how best to leverage social media. And it was a great example of a company that innovated during COVID, which is the time of our launch of our podcast, that had realized travel would come back, but it would come back different. And again, that's literally the whole premise of our podcast. So it was so fascinating to have a conversation with a company that successfully pivoted, embraced social channels, created all of these Instagram accounts based on how people search and behave when looking to book hotels. And it became mandatory listening for a lot of companies. And I found it fascinating when people would tell me, yeah, our CEO sent it around and told us it was required listening. And one of the companies is Tour Radar. Travis had listened to it and he had made it mandatory listening for his team. And they completely reworked their marketing playbook around social, introduced a new $1 million fund for travel creators. And I had a follow-on conversation with Travis on the podcast to talk about that episode, what inspired him, and then all the changes he made as a result of that. So that for me is, that was a landmark episode that really reminded me of just how powerful this platform can be for communicating ideas that can be a real benefit for other organizations.
That's incredible. So you started social media. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm definitely not saying that. I'm definitely not saying that. Mark Zuckerberg, I still don't appreciate exactly what you've done. But but no, the other one too, Amy, that you might find interesting, or listeners, there's a lady named Jacqueline Grossman. Jacqueline Grossman had listened to our podcast. She happens to be based in Toronto. She'd been listening to our podcast from the beginning. I only met her about 6 months ago. She'd been listening to our podcast for a couple of years, and she was keen to meet me at an event that we had, but she was specifically keen to tell me her story, which was that not only she'd been listening from the beginning, but she was in a sort of a life transition in her career. She'd been in travel, but was currently out of travel, like many people post-pandemic. And she was trying to find her way back in. So she listened to all of our podcasts, and then she reached out to every guest that we had, introduced herself, explained what she learned. And she found a great job at Kensington Tours as a result of the podcast. And she wanted to come and tell me that, it really impacted her life and her career, because she felt like she got up to speed and could go into an interview well informed about the trends that are happening. And so for me, that was another point of validation, was just like, okay, this is what we're doing here is meaningful and having a real impact. And so it's like, keep going, keep going.
Wow, how flattering. What a compliment. That's amazing. So, okay, you are talking to people all the time, but looking back, through your career, what really gave you the courage to make that major shift? I mean, you were in travel before, but this was like really doing something completely different than what you were doing. How did you know that this would work, and what made you bet on that?
Well, so I definitely didn't know it would work, but when you look back now, we're 3 years into the Travel Trends podcast, and obviously you're thrilled that it's gotten the reach that it now has, listeners in 125 countries. And as you mentioned, the number one B2B podcast globally. For me, obviously that is quite an accomplishment for myself and the team, but obviously I didn't expect that from the beginning. And I think that's obviously part of going into it. I didn't have those necessarily, I don't say ambition. Obviously I was optimistic. But when you look back, there's a clear through line. And so for me in my career, just to very quickly summarize, I went from working at Carlson Wagonlit, developing corporate travel booking tools, not the sexiest part of travel, but actually it showed me how the plumbing worked and helped me figure out how to connect car, air, hotel, and build out these booking platforms, build cruise booking websites. And being at that intersection of technology and marketing has always been part of my career, but also what I've brought to different travel organizations. So being able to build websites and be able to market new brands is, the kind of the left brain, right brain has been something that's been unique in my role. And so I went to Lonely Planet after Carlson Wagonlit when they were looking to really evolve their businesses before they sold. And I got to be there at a really exciting time in the company because they were positioning the business to advance their digital capabilities to position the company to sale. And so I got to help kind of create some of that value. And also I got to work in an incredible organization at a peak time in their history. But the interesting part, and it relates to, I used to so I was living in Melbourne, Australia, after living in Vancouver. And I used to ride my bike to work. And I used to ride my bike because the weather is fantastic in Australia and I still love Australia. And whenever I live in a city, I always like to walk to work or bike to work. And I was cycling to work, listening to podcasts at the time. And I was listening to people like Marissa Mayer, who at the time was with Google before she took over Yahoo. And there was a particularly meaningful episode that stood out to me when they had launched Google News, and they were talking about how you launch products. And I was a product manager at Lonely Planet, and how you bring, your team together and you decide how many features and functions you're going to be able to launch a product with, and how you prioritize the decision making. And Google's whole business model is based on trying to just get enough functionality to put it out to market and let consumers decide. And this was the point of her story, was highlighting they had one aspect left that they could introduce. The team couldn't decide. They were divided on whether they would use relevancy based on date or location. Nobody could agree. They put it out. And with the first day, they had 90 requests for relevancy based on date. And so they realized it's like, get it out to the consumer and let the consumer decide. And I found this really fascinating. I related to my team, and we made it part of our let's launch and iterate post-launch, which is very common, obviously, in the tech space. And for me, that came from listening to that podcast, having that insight, bringing that into my team. So ever since I started the podcast, I still think of myself like 15, 20 years ago, riding my bike in a Lonely Planet. And if I have the opportunity to interview someone like that, what would I ask them? So I kind of channel my younger self because it helped me advance my career. And so, I went from Lonely Planet. I came to G Adventures, which grew to become the world's largest group adventure travel company. And so Lonely Planet had a successful sale. G Adventures went from $100 million in sales, and now they're on the trajectory to reach $1 billion in sales. And I did the rebranding and launched their new website and did their digital transformation. And then Brett Tolman, who headed up the Travel Corporation, a family-owned company with 40 brands, as you mentioned in the beginning, he brought me in to head up digital transformation. So my role was chief digital officer, and really I took over a lot of the marketing function for the group globally. And the whole idea was to try and make sure these brands remained relevant. First with, building up their social strength, redeveloping their websites, doing more effective digital marketing. And so I was working across all these brands, working with in different regions and with different companies. And I loved my role. I loved my role for the entire time I was there. I moved to LA from Toronto for the last few years to oversee the US region. And it was during COVID. And COVID, obviously, we were there 6 months before COVID hit. Nobody could have anticipated. We just bought a beautiful new office and renovated it. The whole idea was we were going to hire more people and focus on office culture. And for the next 2 years, I was one of only 3 executives going into the office on a twice weekly basis with the floor taped off and all those weird moments that we all lived during COVID. People showing up at the door looking for their refunds on their trips because they couldn't go. It was just such a strange time. I remember looking out my window in my office, obviously thinking, what the hell have I done? My family's moved here. And and the reason I was looking out the window is because I'd read a Focusrite article that had highlighted that it's going to take 10 years for the travel industry to come back to their pre-COVID levels. And as we know now, it took about 3. But nevertheless, there was that moment of like absolute despair for people in the travel industry and people getting let go from their jobs, salary reductions, everything you had to do to cut costs. And really, and at that moment in my life, another unfortunate development, my dad was diagnosed with terminal cancer.
Aww.
And so he was given 6 months to live. He had 5. I decided, given the severity of the circumstances, that I would step out of my corporate role. And it was literally the best decision I've ever made, even though he tried to convince me not to. But I really felt ready, and the business was just getting to the other side of COVID. And I had done a lot of work to prepare the business for the other side, because like most smart travel companies that had the financial wherewithal to be prepared for the other side, the whole idea. So I had created a team called the acceleration team internally that was kind of the best talent in the business, people from marketing and sales and product, accounting, to position the business post-pandemic. And so I felt very confident the business was in a good position, and I was ready to step out and take care of my dad. And I'm so glad I did, because his time ended up being more limited. And we had joked, my dad had a great sense of humor, and he said, don't quit your corporate job. And I said, Dad, I'm going to start a podcast. And so once he did pass and I had a bit of time to kind of process everything, I created 10 episodes of the Travel Trends podcast. And the whole premise was, I wasn't sure where it was going to go. I'll create 10 episodes and I will interview some of the most important executives I've met over my career around the world, from Sydney to Singapore to London to LA, New York, Toronto. And I would speak to them and find out what they're seeing post-pandemic about how the travel industry has changed. What's the same? What's different? And there wasn't a lot of reports. There wasn't a lot of data like it was at that time. So a lot of people wanted to tap into other people's learnings of what you were seeing. And so after 10 episodes, we discovered we had an audience and a great deal of interest. Season 2, we did 20 episodes. And season 3, we finally decided to bring on sponsorship. And, now we're in midway through season 7 of our podcast. And it's, now we're a team of 6, and I love doing it. So it's with a full heart, but it's also, I think the privilege I have now doing this podcast is because of the 20 years of experience I have in the industry. So the conversations I have are not a journalist. Full respect to journalists out there that are reporting on the travel industry, but that's the difference of what we do with Travel Trends. It's an executive peer-to-peer conversation about, unique selling propositions and business strategy, and diving in. That's what I often hear from executives who speak to me, like, you really understand our space, or you really understand our industry. I'm like, yes, I do. And I love it. I'm heavily vested in it. And so yeah, that's really, I think, what is unique about our show, and part of the reason it's worked out so well. And we've built up a global audience.
All right. So let's move into about, sustainability. That is a big part of why I do what I do. And you have a lot of conversations and series on your podcasts about sustainability. And, it's one of those areas that genuinely feels different, as you have mentioned, pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. And I just find that so interesting. But at the same time, I still look back to pre-pandemic and I say, have we come far enough? What is really happening behind the scenes? And you're having some of those really deep, executive conversations. So for the conversations that you've hosted, where do you think the industry has really made meaningful progress? And where do you see that gap between intention and execution? They just can't get there.
Back to my time at Lonely Planet, we used to be doing carbon offsets for our flights. And this is going back 15 years ago, and we couldn't travel anywhere, and we had to be mindful of how much carbon our footprint we were having with our travels. And that carried over to my time with G Adventures, because the idea was small group travel. You're taking local transport, and that's another great way to be able to travel. And you're also traveling more sustainably because you're visiting local communities, and you're giving back to the people. You're lifting communities up by your travel dollars. And that's something I've always felt very strongly about. And so this is where when people think about sustainability, sometimes people instantly go to, the towels in the bathroom at the hotel, or like they go to the thing, or the water bottles. I mean, those are probably the two most overused examples, and people getting criticized for using a water bottle. And it's so much bigger than that.
Yes.
But those are, and so for me, one of the things I was really keen to understand, because going into the pandemic, when the travel brands I was working with, sustainability for a company like G Adventures that has Planetera as part of their kind of mission, that they have their kind of nonprofit arm, and they help women's weaving projects in places like Jordan and so these different or in Peru. And then at my time at the Travel Corporation, the business built out Tread Right. And the whole idea was to make sure that you're preserving the places you travel to. So it's something that I think a lot of travelers instinctually believe in. And so the reason for that's important is that travelers are then looking for travel companies that emulate their values. And oftentimes they're not going to choose a company that and this happens with the big cruise lines, right? There's a big pushback against cruise lines for some of their behaviors, and not to call them out. There's lots of people that are, that are having a negative impact on the environment, but that's one more egregious example with some, and it also affects the local communities because they're not putting money in the local economy, except for people getting off the ship and buying a few trinkets. And so these are all things that have been meaningful for me over my career. What I was keen to understand, though, post-pandemic, getting back to your exact question, was when we were doing surveying of customers. Kentucky is a good example. I was overseeing Kentucky in the US region, and we took the top 10 factors, and we were doing these focus groups and these studies to try and figure out where people would make a difference on their travel. Like, what was the messaging you needed to get across to them? Sustainability ranked 8th, 9th, or 10th. So out of 10, it was not the top 3, not the top 5, and it was at the bottom of the top 10 list. But it was like a nice to have. It was like one of those things that you don't make a decision based on that, but you'll finalize a decision amongst a range of options if it also has that. And so it was kind of the thing you needed to be doing as well, which is what leads to greenwashing. A lot of companies just trying to, kind of fake their credentials that they really care about this space. And I say that with some, I can say that now because I'm not a corporate. I'm not beholden to anyone or a corporation, in my opinion. But I saw the meaningful work that was being done with Tread Right, Planetera before, and then how do you actually change consumer behavior? So it's literally been a question I've asked on every podcast interview. And then we did a deep dive. We did a panel on sustainability post-pandemic. And we did a series on sustainability. And what's amazing is that it ranks now in the top 5. And oftentimes it's like, it's, 3rd, 4th, or 5th. And so working with organizations like the Adventure Travel and Trade Association, it's being sustainable is table stakes now. You're not even going to get business if you're not proving your sustainable credentials. People are going to see through it, and they're not going to believe in your travel with you. And so that's, for me, really encouraging overall, is that more travel, the awareness is increased, and people are making decisions. And you're even seeing, just to give you one very specific example, Booking.com with eco ratings, because how do you make sure that consumers can make informed decisions? So present the options. So long as the price is comparable, people are choosing more sustainable options. And that's really encouraging.
It is. But, okay, so there's 2 questions that I just came off of another podcast, and these were 2 things that we talked about. I would love to get your perspective. One is, yes, I truly believe that it is important to the traveler, but we're still dealing with a gap, right? They're saying they want to do one thing, but yet when it comes down to price, or if it comes down to just, really anything that takes them into a vacuum or forces them to choose outside of their comfort zone, they may not be choosing that correct, quote unquote, sustainable option. So what do you think will help close that gap? And do you think that it's the industry's responsibility? Do you think it's the traveler's responsibility? Do you think it's a mix of both? How do you see that all coming together?
Well, it's really interesting. One of the things that's come clear in our conversations with various experts in this field is not to put the onus on the consumer.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunately what all too common is the case, because the consumer, yes, is an important factor, but really it's the corporations themselves and actually looking at their entire, most companies, the end product of running a sustainable is actually making sure that your entire business model is sustainably structured, and that you are, taking out plastics or taking out and so, your ESG strategy is important for any company. But here's the interesting thing that has also come up as a result of it, because people are motivated by personal interest and companies are motivated by profit. And so as it becomes more profitable and it becomes more desirable for travelers, it's having a knock-on effect that, with hotels that have become LEED certified and that have moved to green, they're actually worth more. So they sell for higher valuations.
Yep.
So so if you can build it into your business model that actually, from a CFO point of view, this is more efficient and you're actually going to drive more revenue as a result of it. So that to me is more meaningful, because it's not what you don't want is a cost center, because no matter when we were during COVID or post-pandemic times now and the world economy seems uncertain, anyone's going to do anything they can to reduce cost. And so how do you do that in a way that's sustainable? So I think the examples that more and more companies are sharing about how they've moved to sustainability, but done so in a way that's actually made their business leaner, more efficient, and more profitable, is ultimately, I think that's where the pressure needs to be applied. But also, I don't think in shaming the customer is the right approach. And that's why I disagree with some of the approaches when it comes to mandating that people have to travel by train, or so people might just not go, or it's like if you put it in the too hard basket for customers, or you make them feel badly. And that's why I can't, the one I really can't stand is the hotel towel, because that is literally like one of the joys of staying in a hotel. I want a fresh towel. I just want a fresh towel the next day. Like I don't get to leave my towel on the floor in my home and come back in my the next day. And it's like, that's one of the joys of a hotel stay. And now you're going to have me hang a sign on my door telling you that I don't want that service because I want to focus on the environment. And it's like, that's putting so much, but that's a great operational efficiency for the hotel. It's not just about the environment. It's about the fact that actually we don't need to clean the room that day. You don't need your towels replaced. So like those are the things that I think travelers get frustrated about.
What about storytelling, though? I know you're probably in conversations when it comes to storytelling. It's a buzzword right now, but I think that is another way that we can help close that gap. Do you think that brands that are doing meaningful work, they just haven't figured out how to translate that into something that the travelers feel or desire? And is language, as we talked about, is language hurting us? Sustainability, regeneration, all of these different terminologies. Are travelers having a problem understanding what any of it means?
Yes. And terminology is one of the big challenges, because anytime we've had these conversations on our podcast, you just mentioned a few of the terms, but regenerative tourism is obviously another buzz phrase. And they each mean slightly different things. Is it sustainable? Is it regenerative? And so if we can't agree on terminology, and then we also can't agree on what everyone needs to do collectively, I think the one thing that you see this in the way that people choose to give back, because ultimately I think we all have most of us, except for the psychopaths out there, which are like 1% of the population, they're out there for sure. But the vast majority of us have altruism built into our DNA. And so we have altruistic behavior. We will stop and help someone across the street. We will. And that's why I say travelers, there's this common, I'll use the word humanity, but there's a community around the travel, and that people will pick each other up, and we will. And so, but what I find really interesting about what drives behavior, because again, as a marketer and someone in business, I'm always looking at those things of what actually motivates behavior. And it's usually having a personal connection to something. So,
Yes.
when you give someone the opportunity to decide what they're going to give back to, and in my case, obviously, I've donated to cancer initiatives, and because it has a meaningful, like I have a connection there, and I feel like it'll make a difference. And I think the same applies to people because for me, we talk about people, planet, profit. The two things that stand out to me when I think about the impact I want to have, it's first about people, 100%, 100 about people. I make most of my travel decisions on what I think is going to be better for the communities I'm going to visit, and not visiting, or reasons why I would visit or how I would visit. The Galapagos is a good example. I was adamant about not sailing and cruising around the Galapagos, so I traveled through the islands in the Galapagos, and the number of people that thanked me, not that I was looking for that. I wasn't like, I'm not looking for that. I guess not looking for that validation, but the number of people that said to me, thank you for staying in our hotel. Thank you for staying at our restaurant. Because otherwise that money doesn't reach the people on the islands. But the other part for me is animals. I'm a big dog lover. People who follow me on Instagram know that I've got this gorgeous, golden doodle named Moose, that our daughter was adamant that she had to have when we moved back from LA. And she told us that if she didn't have a dog, her childhood would be ruined. And so
Yay!
6 weeks later, it's my dog, and it's actually at my feet right now as we're having this conversation. Aww. And so for me, animals, and so those are the two things that I will go out of my way to support, to be involved in. And I think that's where companies need to meet people on the level that they're on. And I think that more of that is actually what's needed, as opposed to trying to create these policies that have to apply to everyone. And water being one of these constant examples of, what we need to limit and what we need. But showing someone an example, like Celine Cousteau would use the example of which became quite a viral image of the sea turtle with a plastic straw up its nose, right? Like just horrific imagery. And I still remember it was in the Galapagos where I saw a sea turtle swimming in the water for the first time. And it was so majestic. It was so beautiful. So until you have that personal connection, like all of a sudden it's just like that becomes more meaningful, because it's just like you see their habitat and think about how it's being devastated. So I think connecting with people on a human level with something that is really meaningful for them, I think is a much more effective approach for companies.
And, there's one other thing too. One Hotels is now, with their mission members rewards, they're allowing guests to choose the, philanthropic endeavor that they want to be aligned with. And that's where their dollars or their points go. And I just think that's so smart, because like you touched on, when you can really tap into what is important to you individually, we all don't have the same interests, then that's when you really get people to pay attention and want to be part of your brand story. So I'm sure you've been in many conversations like that.
Rather than talking about sustainability and an eco lodge. So for me, I stayed in an eco lodge in Belize, and it was a fantastic experience in the jungle. But I actually, when it was positioning itself as an eco lodge, I had that perspective of do I want to be staying amongst the other eco people in the eco lodge? And I'm thinking, and the reason I say that is because my mindset goes to, I'm not going to be comfortable. There's probably many of the services I would come to expect. I mean,
we know Dan wants a fluffy, fresh towel, everyone. So
I want fresh socks every day and a fresh towel. Yes. I'm a simple man. I don't ask for much, but those are my basic requests. But no, at the eco lodge, one of the things they did is they didn't allow Wi-Fi in each of your cabins. The only Wi-Fi was available was at the front desk. And when you sat together at the table, it was a communal table for dinner. And so for me, some of the things, you're absolutely right. When we travel, we want to connect with other people. It's literally written on our DNA, that idea of tribal travel. I mean, the whole Dunbar number where, Robert Dunbar, the concept of, we can only, our neocortex can only retain enough information on about 150 people. So we feel safe in these small communities, and we can only maintain relationships with 5 to 12 people meaningfully. So forget Mark Zuckerberg and the idea that you have, hundreds or thousands of friends. What they even found with these social platforms is that men and women still actually tend to spend the majority of their time with a small group of people, because we are absolutely instinctually tribal. And so the idea that you then travel and you realize this feels good, this feels right, because this is actually, how we've evolved as a species. These are the things that we gravitate to. And I think, so my point of saying that is there's a different way to position these eco resorts so that it's not just like that sustainability does become table stakes. The expectation is you're going there for an experience where, so positioning it based on wellness as an example, which obviously a lot of companies are doing. So personal wellness, mental health wellness. And then when you're staying at a place where there's no limited electricity or connectivity, and then what that does for your mental health and your overall well-being. And all of a sudden you are, having a detox, and it's like and you realize that this is all about connecting you to nature. And so I think there's sometimes a different path for marketers and people in the travel space, as opposed to saying, come stay at our eco lodge. It's like, have the most incredible wellness experience that will truly transform you'll come back feeling changed from this trip. You'll feel better. You'll look better. Your skin will it's just tell people all the things they're going to get as a result of it. What classic marketing, what's in it for me? And then also layer in the fact that, did you know that this is off the grid and we power everything? It's just like, don't lead with that, follow with that.
Yeah. Which leads me to transformational travel, talking about another, let's call it nomenclature, if we will, but that is another really important, conversation right now, which bleeds into wellness. And I know that that shift from the experience economy to the transformational economy, it's something that you talk about. It looks like people really want those kinds of experiences. How do you think transformational travel shows up in real trips and real experiences? Is it different than what we just were discussing?
Well, it's really interesting. You use the word nomenclature, which is actually really important here, because if we look at, and I'll just use my exact story of the journey here. I read Joseph Pine's book, The Experience Economy, shortly after graduating university. It was very popular at the time. It came out in 1999. I probably read it about 20 years ago. And it stuck with me. It was one of the reasons I wanted to work in the travel industry. I had the good fortune of having Joe Pine on our podcast. He's been on 3 times in the last 7 months. But the first time he was on, it was to finish off our deep dive in the world of experiences. So it was like, and what was interesting, so when I interviewed him then, and then I met him in person subsequently, and we did a live interview in person, he was working on his book, The Transformation Economy, which I was following as he was posting on Substack. And what really stood out to me was how much of what he was then documenting and talking about in his book is something that we've been doing in the travel industry for at least 10 years or more. And so when I think about the example with G Adventures, when we were rebranding that business and looking at what are the core values that we want people to identify the brand with, the number one consideration for us was life-changing adventures. And I think a lot of people have seen adventure travel as transformative travel without calling it that. People have been choosing soft adventures, companies like Intrepid. And we have a friend of ours that just turned 50. She's divorced. Her son was just going off to university, and she decided to leave her senior executive HR job because she's just ready for a change. And so I told her to take an Intrepid trip to Morocco, and she's come back totally changed, inspired for the next phase of her life. And so when we look at people are living longer, they're more active than ever, like all these factors that are at play demographically, and then what I always like to talk about, the psychographics, the things that doesn't matter if you're 65 or 25, there's a commonality of those people when they arrive on a trip together. And that's part of the joy of not just being limited to a certain age group, is that you get that wisdom or you get that youthful energy. And it's like that creates a great mix in a group experience. But the interesting thing here is that what we've been talking about, and even if you look at the types of trips people have been embracing, like polar trips and these bucket list trips, the people have been looking, and most of us want to come back from our holiday feeling changed, positive, impacted in some way, where we see the world differently. Like our perspective has been altered. Even if it's you finally had a chance to relax and unwind, and but also you typically want to experience something a bit more, going deeper, making connections with locals and experiencing something that, has real awe or wonder, all these things. So all of this, from my vantage point, we've been moving in this direction. What's happened now is that with him publishing this book in February of 2026, is that it's going to enter the zeitgeist. And the reason I believe strongly that will be the case is because when I interviewed Rod Cuthbert, the founder of Viator, who, when I spoke to him about why do you think Viator took off when it did, because Viator, they sold it for $100 million to TripAdvisor, 15, 18 years ago. It's now a $2 billion company. And you look at the activities space, what Joe Pine was talking about, it took 10 or 15 years for the experience economy. And everyone now talks about experiences over things. We take the experience economy almost for granted that everyone wants experiences. We give experiences as gifts. We're more interested in giving people experiences over, physical goods, because people have most things they need. But what they actually want is something that money just can't buy. You would need, and so what I find fascinating was that what Rod Cuthbert told me was that he felt as though right after they launched Viator was when experiences was entering the zeitgeist. It was just past this 1980s Gordon Gekko, he who dies with the most toys wins. Terrible expression. I don't like that expression, but I highlight that like that was an era, and that greed is good. And that, it was no longer about the big house and all the cars and the boat and all those things. And it's just like, you can't take those with you when you go, right? That expression. And all of a sudden, people were all of a sudden rushing to do more meaningful things with their money and with their time and taking really interesting trips. So all of a sudden, people wanted experiences. But I really believe that as more people actually understand what transformative travel is, they're actually going to go into their travel advisors and they're going to use those words. They're going to say, I want a really transformative travel experience. Right now, they're saying, I want an adventure. I want to go on an adventure. I want to go on my hero's journey, to quote another academic. But it's just like that. I find that fascinating that people, and I'm going to be really intrigued to follow that over the next few years. And Joe Pine had said to me on the last podcast, this is not just a trend for 2026. This is the next 5 or 10 years that people are going to be looking for transformative travel experiences.
So, okay, you bring up a really interesting point. If you're a travel advisor out there, what do you think is going to be key to, sell these types of trips and get people on board? How do they do that?
So the first thing I've done a lot of keynotes recently, and I've always brought up the book. I don't get any
royalties or residuals.
Royalties, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Aside from Joe sent me a signed copy, and obviously I adore Joe and appreciate what he's contributed. There's literally 3 chapters in this book about creating transformative travel experiences, and the difference between what is just an experience, because he outlines that there's 5 different types of the economy. So there's goods and services. And then there are commodities, and then there are experiences, and now there's transformative travel or transformative experiences. And what's the difference between an experience and what is something that is truly transformative? And it highlights the fact that this is exactly what all of us are looking for without being able to describe it, that we are very intentional about the fact that we are like the outcome of that experience is to have to change us in some positive way. And that ultimately is what people are seeking personally or for their business. And so the great news here is there is the Transformational Travel Council, TTC, a guy named Jake Halpert that runs that, fantastic guy. And him and his team work with travel organizations to figure out how they can actually create trips that are truly transformative. Because I think another thing that's going to happen here, Amy, and it relates to our conversation about sustainability, is we're going to go through another wave where some people are going to be claiming transformative travel experiences.
Yeah.
And I raised this exact question with Joe on the last time he was on the podcast, because I said to him, when some people might think about transform, they might think of just going to a spa and indulging themselves. And I said, how do you differ between something that is actually just in your own personal self-interest versus, and as he said, as you remember, with the idea of the hero's journey, when you come back from the hero's journey that you've been on, is that you reward the community. The community is better off. You come back with a bounty to be able to share with the community, to encourage other people to learn from that example, or to be able to reap the benefits of and that's I was like, you know what? Those are the people I love the most that come back from a trip. That not only, it's not just look at my photos, look what I've done. It's actually look what I've brought back for you, or look what I've learned, or look at it's just so there's a different approach to people who come back from a trip. It's no longer about purely the egotistical, and that's another thing we need to move away from. I just had to highlight too, because so many travelers and having young kids that are on social media, just traveling around Europe to take selfies of themselves in major sites, just to check these things off. This is going back to the style of travel that's not transformative travel. But
no.
So I would highly suggest, and this is giving credit where credit's due, to buy the book and read those 3 chapters, and then figure out how it applies to your business, because I think it takes a more meaningful consideration of thinking about your business, thinking about what you currently offer, and is how do you put a new lens on this in a way that will meet the customers based on what they're actually seeking today. And whether it's wine tours or restaurants, there are ways to make travel more experiential and that's ultimately what people are going to come back raving about.
If you were a travel brand right now, what would you tell them to stop saying? What would you tell them to start saying if they really want to be relevant in this next chapter?
The human touch. I think the human touch and the relationships that we have with people, especially for travel advisors, because why should it be the case that a company like Fora that did 1.5 billion in revenue last year by introducing a whole new generation of young professionals to be a travel advisor, they're literally using a platform that in many ways, a traveler could go and use an online travel agency and do their own, but they want a human to help them make decisions on their trips and take some of those, the complications take that over for them and navigate that on their behalf and just know that it's all done. And so they rely on that human having the power of technology. But when it comes to, so my whole thing to these virtuoso, it was crazy, Amy, when I saw this stat. I was speaking at three of their conferences. The first conferences I saw a stat that 29% of their preferred agencies were working on chatbots. And like and then like 14% were working on CRM or back office. And I was like, hold the phone.
Yeah.
Pause those projects. Do not train your customers to work with a chatbot versus you directly. This should empower you to take your time. You shouldn't be focusing your efforts on filing and like doing back office stuff and putting technology in front of the consumer. You got to flip that around and use all your time to protect what I refer to, in the startup space, you refer to your moat. And what is it going to protect you against competition? And the moat is the direct relationship you have with a customer who will trust you as where they go for their next holiday because they rely on their travel advisor and they continue to. And this, one last thing, Amy, because I find this is so interesting about the time that we're in. Half the baby boomers have retired. The other half will retire in the next 5 years. Before this whole generational wealth transfer that takes place, most of these active seniors are going to spend as much of their savings on travel as possible, which is why all these private equity firms have gotten into travel. This is a 10 to 20 year, like travelers are going to go from 400 million a year in 2025 to 800 million a year in 2050. So therefore, we have to be talking about sustainability. We have to be talking about overcrowding. We have to be finding new ways for people to experience destinations because the appetite for travel is only going to increase.
Yeah.
And the desire for people to work with humans. So like a lot of those older travelers, they're used to travel advisors, and we're seeing younger people embrace them as well. So that to me is like that.
Drop the mic.
Here's, can I share one other little cool thing, a little quick story with you? So the last one I did, I did a 3-city tour, and the last city tour I was, it happened to be back here in Toronto, which is home base for me, even though, I'm often away from here more than I'm here. But I still love it and call it home. But when I started my career in travel, I actually was a tour guide for a summer. I was working on a startup, and I used to point out this hotel to all the guests coming into Toronto. This was, the hotel is the Fairmont, which is known as the Canadian Pacific Hotel, the Royal York, right across from Union Station. Many listeners who've been to Toronto would know this landmark. It was the tallest hotel in the British Empire when it was built in 1929 at 28 stories. And right next to it is a building that Joseph Campbell, The Hero's Journey. One of the things that he highlights is that if you go to any city or look at any civilization and look at the tallest buildings, it'll tell you what they worship. And so for many years, of course, it was the church, and it was also medieval castles. And what is it today in modern society? Banks. So we worship money. And so all the tallest buildings in every the big cities, with some of the exception being some of these new condo developments, which is an interesting kind of, when you think about what that actually means for, self-indulgence and like status and grandeur. But really, by and large, they're banks. And I had pointed out that actually one of the most impressive buildings around the street is the Toronto Dominion Bank building. And the Spanish architect that had built it, he had asked the executives, what is it that you most would like most in the new office building? And almost all the senior executives all wanted a corner office. So for the top 15 stories of the building, he maximized the number of corner offices. On one floor, they have 13 corner offices. And, people are traveling in from their suburban homes into the city, within their career, with the idea of making their way up to the top of those bank buildings to a corner office. I mean, that's their career. That's their life. That's their journey. And as I mentioned to these travel advisors, those are your clients. Those are your customers. These are these high-end luxury travelers that are then calling you to say, I need a holiday. And so you have to be thinking from their perspective. And so, what's going on in their world? So what are they looking for now more than ever? They're looking for things like expedition cruising. They want bragging rights, of course. I mean, like that's still a part of our human nature. They want to do something that is, really unique and really experiential. And then all of a sudden we're seeing this wave. I had Peekaboo Street on our podcast recently, who is the famous Olympic skier. And she's part of this new 6-part tour where you can travel with her and other famous skiers to 6 of the most famous World Cup and Olympic destinations. You can ski with them, you can watch a race, you can learn about it. And it's designed for high net worth, affluent clients, like a virtuoso client is perfect for that. But that's experiential travel, and this is where I just think there's going to continue to be just a massive appetite for luxury travel, because of the money that's flowing into this space.
Yeah.
And all of these experiences, you just keep looking around. You and I are both seeing it. Like there's new companies that are springing up. There's other companies that are doing interesting things. Like it is a really exciting time to be in the travel industry. I think that's one thing we're probably both seeing. And that's why I think obviously we get on so well and enjoy these conversations, because it's an exciting time to see the shifts, the changes, and then also kind of try and read the tea leaves and figure out exactly what's going on here.
Well, I want to ask a few lighter questions here at the end, because I always try to make this as fun as I can. And I know you do too in your conversations. So let's start with, do you have any weird travel hacks or just something that you bring home when you're always traveling, or you have to eat, or, what's something that is like just a constant when you're traveling that you're like, this has to come with me, or I got to eat this, or what is it?
So I genuinely love travel hacks because I do travel so much. So things that can make my travel process easier, smoother, checking in the airport, having status, being in the lounges. And so for me, I'm always have multiple gadgets and multiple screens on the go. And the two things that are like must take with me is I always need something to mount my phone, because I'm not always in business class, and most people aren't. But like no matter what seat you get stuck in, sometimes if you have a device that can mount your phone, that for me has been a game changer, because I'm doing multiple things. So I'll be watching something on my phone while I'm working on my laptop. And then it feels like you're not working because you're kind of like you're watching a great Netflix show while you're working on a report. And so I'm always maximizing the number of screens I can have in front of me. That's one. The other one is actually using your headphones. More airlines, so you can now connect your device and actually use Bluetooth to connect to your headphones as you're using those terrible. It's amazing the sound difference when you kind of try and go back to the wired headphones that they give you.
Yeah. And they don't even they don't stay in my ears. They're constantly like falling out, and like maybe I have like the smallest ears on the planet.
Yeah. And then a good brick, a power charger source, I always have in my bag.
Yeah.
Like just like splurge on that, because it just keeps everything like fully operational. Because next thing you know, your AirPods are dying, your phone's dying, and your laptop you can't. So, but the last thing, Amy, and this has been like I only got this about 2 months ago, because I spend so much time on a screen, as I'm sure you do, and I noticed my eyes were watering and they were driving me crazy. And it turns out I have dry eyes, which is ironic because they're watering. Like it doesn't make, but it's because you don't blink enough. And I'm never going. That's the reason. I've subsequently learned from my optician that there's the 20-20-20 rule. So every 20 minutes, look 20 feet away for 20 seconds. That's sort of one of the tips. But
that's a really good tip.
But one of the things is that if you have dry eyes, like many of your listeners, I've discovered, turns out, because I've been mentioning this now, and people are like, I have dry eyes. It turns out it's a thing. It's an epidemic of dry eyes, which makes sense. If we're constantly looking at screens, we're forgetting to blink, is like our eyes start to water. I'm never going to take the time to like heat something up in the microwave or like have a compress. So I ordered a Thermabody, Theragun and Therabody.
Yes.
They have smart goggles, and they are an absolute game changer because they have 3 different heat settings. So and they have 3 different power settings, and then 3 different settings for if you have a headache, or if you're having a nap, or you're going to sleep. And it lasts for exactly 15 minutes. And I use them all the time. And the lady who runs Virtuoso Canada, Karen, was behind me on the plane. And I got on the plane and said, I'm going to put these on. And I slept for the entire flight. And she's like, I need to order those. And she has, because I love it. Like it's like knockout, black shades.
Interesting.
But it massages your forehead. It provides heat and pressure. It's glorious. I saw them actually at a Virtuoso conference for a luxury hotel that had them as like one of the things they put in your room. And anyway, I thought they were over $1,000. Turns out they're $250. You can order on Amazon. You can just order at their body's website. And so that is my new travel hack. I take them everywhere.
Okay, so what's a destination or an experience that you think is totally overrated?
I'm sorry, south of Spain and south of Portugal. Like I have, I was born in England, and I say that because all those, they're just filled with the British pubs. And there's Saturday Night Live has just launched in the UK. And for those of you that would like to have a good laugh, if you look up SNL UK and the British pub, there's a great skit about the fact that Brits just travel to places just to go and hang out at the pub with the same people and watch soccer. And that's literally what happens in southern Spain and southern Portugal. And so it's one of the few places I've been to where just like there's no culture, there's no you have to work hard to find local food, and so, and I can say that as a British person, my fellow countrymen that are just like, come on guys, you can do better than this.
Okay, good. I've not been to either one of them, and so they're actually not on the top, but I'm going to keep them there. I would like to go just about everywhere once, but that's a really good tip from someone who has traveled all over the world. Okay, what is the grossest thing that's ever happened to you on a trip?
I'll put a slight spin on it. The scariest moment, I'll say one of my scariest moments on it. We were traveling for 3 months through Southeast Asia, and we ended up, friends that we've been traveling with had convinced us to go to Malaysia. And we're so glad that we did. So we went down to Singapore, and this was a cool stage of life. I mean, this was like a real highlight of our travels. We were running low on funds, as you do as a young traveler, and you're backpacking, and we were headed to Australia. You need to have a certain amount of money in your account. And anyway, it turns out they don't really check. But nevertheless, you had that fear that you're not going to get your visa unless you can show them that you have this amount of money in the bank. And so we went to a bank in Kuala Lumpur and took out $1,000 on our credit card, withdrew $1,000, which I'd heard you could do, but get a cash advance on your credit cards. It's not something I advise I'll advise our kids to do,
this is not the travel hack.
This is not the travel hack. But interestingly, so we took out $1,000 and we lived for 2 weeks in Malaysia. Because you could stay, on the beach for $30 a night, and you could have a fresh seafood dinner for $5. And we were so relaxed and so chill. But we were staying at a place, and that night I was stirring, and someone tried to climb in our window to steal our stuff. And it was the most and it was just a reminder to just always be aware of
so scary.
And I woke up as he was entering our room through the window and reaching for our bag on the and so. And he thankfully quickly scattered and got out of there. And we basically shut the window because we had the window open because it was hot. And then we shut the windows, and we were kind of a bit panicked about it for the next few hours. We got up in the morning and we told the front of the hotel. They had no idea who it was or what was going on. So we just checked out, and we're so that was the reason I share that is because that was actually the scariest thing. And when you ask people like Tony and Maureen Wheeler from Lonely Planet, who I had the privilege to work with, because they are truly inspiring people, and they've written their books, and they would always get asked what was the worst travel experience, and they didn't have one. It was just and they're not intentionally, it's just by and large, travel, they've had so many great travel experiences. It was and we tend to dwell on the negative, but that was the one that was just a little bit scary. But honestly, gross is more to do with.
I'm gonna ask that offline.
Yeah, sounds good.
What animal energy does Dan Christian walk through the world with and bring into the world? What's your animal energy, Dan?
So can I expound on this one as our last question, because I actually in our interview, Amy kind of gave me just a few tips and heads up of some of the things she likes to ask. And I do the same with my guests as well, just to make them sort of feel comfortable and kind of have a level of, preparedness. And it's one thing she had kind of kidded about that she was going to ask at the end. And one of the things I'm also mindful of is this comes up with my family, because I'll make a comment about how I'm so laid back, and my family will laugh at me. They're like, "You are so intense. You're not laid back at all." And I'm like, but some people think I'm laid back. And they're like, no. So what was interesting to me, so I took my danchristian.com, I took my profile and I put it into my ChatGPT account and asked this question.
Oh my God.
And I loved the answer. So I was like, based on everything you know about me, like what kind of animal energy do you think I bring into the world? And this was awesome. And it said, if I had to translate that into animal energy, I'd say you give off hawk and fox energy. The hawk, because you're zoomed out, you think in patterns, trends, and systems rather than just tactics. You're scanning the landscape for what's emerging, what's shifting, and where attention is going. And you're making decisions from a higher vantage point instead of getting stuck in the weeds. And I was like, oh my God, that's awesome. I'm totally hawk energy. Oh. And then the fox, it was like, there's adaptability and optimism in how you approach things. You're comfortable navigating ambiguity and finding angles others miss. And it suggests a mix of strategy and scrappiness rather than rigid structure. And I was like, damn, that is me. So yes, I was like, so it turns out I'm going to
cheat code. Anybody coming on the podcast, don't you do that. But that is so interesting. I'm going to do that.
I'm a hawk and a fox. That's like that's the energy apparently I'm giving off. So
and those are very complimentary, by the way.
Oh, are they? Okay, good to know.
Yeah, yes, I mean, from the descriptions, absolutely.
So, Amy, what would you have said now that, you've met me and we obviously have gotten time together? Putting those two aside, you don't have what energy do you think I give off? And then I can actually answer the same as you, and then we can wrap up.
I'm almost thinking a little iguana energy, because you do seem laid back, but yet you're always checking out your surroundings, taking in everything, on alert. Right? The minute somebody comes into your sphere, you're on it and you know exactly what to do with that person or that information. So I'm going iguana.
The reason I actually really like that, because our trip to the Galapagos, when I had the kids read An Origin of the Species. And one of the things that Charles Darwin highlighted, one of the things that it blew his mind, because there's no other place in the world where iguanas can swim. And they had to learn to adapt to their environment, and they had to learn to swim during the 6 months of the year where there's no grass on land, to swim down and eat the green algae at the bottom of the ocean. So when he arrived, and he wrote this in his book, he was throwing these iguanas out into the water and watching them swim back, because he just couldn't believe what he was seeing.
Yeah.
So I love that, because as we both know, adaptability, that's the key to survival.
It is the key to survival.
Yeah. So
and
I'll take
as a
that.
podcast host, right? You never know. Get a curveball thrown at you, and you gotta make it happen. Except, thank God for editing, because Dan, this has been such a pleasure, and I thank you for your time. I hope everybody will watch this. Of course, tell the audience, if they don't know about you, where they can find you and follow along your journey and all of your incredible conversations.
I gladly, but I just want to make sure that I pay you a compliment in this too, because obviously, I'm a huge fan of yours. I really appreciate the work that you do. It's obviously an honor to be invited to be on the podcast. I've so enjoyed this conversation, truly, genuinely. I'm buzzing. I'm going to get off this and make a cup of coffee and reflect on our chat. But one of the things I had done for you was actually, I had turned that question around as to based on what I know about you and what is your energy. And you ready for this?
Okay, I'm ready. I'm ready.
Deer and dolphin.
Deer and dolphin.
Deer, because you're grounded in sensitivity to the natural world. That you're calm, which is certainly warm, approachable. That's obviously the dolphin side, very intelligent, and a strong communicator. And so there you go. My thank you to you. Yeah.
It's my favorite person ever. Thank you. That's interesting. Yeah. I always say I'm my spirit animal is the orangutan. But I like what you came up with better. So I'm gonna use that.
No, thanks, Amy. And just if anyone wants to reach out to me, danchristian.com, you can find out more information about me, but more importantly, traveltrendspodcast.com. We do post weekly episodes. We're in season 7 now, and we also do spotlight episodes where we focus on some of the people that are having the biggest impact on travel and companies as well. I'm on most of the big events, so you can find it Travel Trends Podcast under events. And we're doing our next big conference. It's virtual, so anyone can attend from around the world at the end of October, and it's free to register right now. This is our third year. We've brought a few thousand people together to talk about where the industry is headed. And based on sponsorship, we've now made it entirely free for people to join.
Wow.
And so, and that's kind of our mission, is to have the biggest impact and reach that we can to have a meaningful benefit to people in their careers or growing their travel businesses. And feel free to send me an email, dan@traveltrendspodcast.com. I'd love to hear from you. And Amy, I look forward to having you on our podcast in the near future.
Oh, that would be amazing. Dan, thank you. We can't wait to hear all the feedback. We know everybody's going to love this conversation. Thank you for joining us again on the Conscious Check-In. Make sure to like and subscribe. That helps us continue these conversations, and we will see you on the next one. That was your Conscious Check-In. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and let us know who you'd love to hear from next. Until next time, travel deeper and stay inspired.